The bank letter landed on the kitchen table like a slap. Elena Marchetti stared at the red stamp across the top of the page and felt her stomach drop. Her father, Vincent Marchetti, sat across from her, his hands shaking as he poured himself another drink. He would not look at her. "Papa, what does this mean?" she asked, though some part of her already knew the answer would ruin everything. Vincent finally lifted his eyes. They were red, tired, and full of a fear she had never seen in him before. "It means we have lost the house, the business, everything. I owe more money than I could ever repay in 10 lifetimes." Elena felt the room tilt. She had grown up believing her father was untouchable, a man who built an empire from nothing. Now he looked smaller than she had ever seen him, like a candle burning down to nothing. "To who?" she whispered. "Who do you owe this much money to?" Vincent's jaw tightened. Duke Damien Ashcroft. The name hit her like cold water. Everyone in the city knew that name. Damien Ashcroft was spoken of in hushed tones, admired for his brilliance, and feared for his coldness. He was a man who had turned 3 failing companies into empires within a single year, crushing anyone who stood in his way without blinking. Elena had seen his photograph in magazines, always unsmiling, always alone, always looking like a man, carved from stone, rather than born from flesh. "How did this happen?" she asked, though her voice had gone flat with disbelief. Her father would not meet her eyes again. He told her about the investments that failed, the loans he took to cover the first loans, the deals that seemed too good to walk away from, until the day they collapsed entirely. He had gone to men he trusted, and one of those men had quietly sold his debt to Damien Ashcroft without warning. Now that debt belonged to the Duke, and the Duke wanted his money. "There must be a way to fix this," Elena said, gripping the edge of the table. "We can sell what's left, we can negotiate, we can find another investor." "There is a way," Vincent interrupted, and something in his tone made her go still. "Ashcroft has made an offer." Elena felt a chill crawl up her spine. What offer? Her father took a long breath, as if trying to find the courage to say words he already despised. "He said the debt could disappear, all of it, if you agree to marry him." For a moment, Elena thought she had misheard him. She almost laughed, waiting for him to say it was some cruel joke, some misunderstanding that would be cleared up in a moment. But Vincent's face did not change. He looked at her with a desperate, pleading expression that told her this was real. "You cannot be serious," she said, standing up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Papa, I don't even know this man. I have never spoken to him in my life. You want me to marry a stranger to erase your mistakes?" "Elena, please," Vincent said, his voice breaking. "If I do not pay this debt, we lose everything, not just money, our name, our home, our future. I have already spoken with the lawyers. There is no other way out of this. Ashcroft holds all the power here." Elena felt anger and fear rising together inside her chest, tangled so tightly she could not tell which was stronger. She thought of her mother, who had passed away years ago, and wondered what she would say if she could see her husband now, bargaining away their daughter's future to save his own reputation. "And if I refuse?" she asked quietly. Vincent's silence was answer enough. If she refused, they would lose the house, the last of their savings, and possibly face charges for the debts he could not pay. Worse, he hinted that Ashcroft was not a man who took refusal lightly. There were rumors, unconfirmed but persistent, of people who had crossed him and disappeared from society entirely, their businesses destroyed, their names erased from every guest list in the city. Elena walked to the window and looked out at the garden that had once felt like a paradise to her as a child. Now it felt like a cage she had not known she was standing in. She thought about running, about disappearing somewhere far away where no one had ever heard the name Marchetti or Ashcroft. But she knew, deep down, that leaving would only make things worse for her father, and despite everything, she still loved him. "When does he want an answer?" she asked without turning around. "Tomorrow morning," Vincent said. "He does not like to wait." That night, Elena barely slept. She sat by her window, staring at the moonlight, replaying every rumor she had ever heard about Damien Ashcroft. Some said he had been betrayed by someone he trusted long ago, and that betrayal had turned him into the ruthless man he was today. Others said he was simply born without a heart, incapable of feeling anything beyond ambition. No one seemed to know the truth, only the fear his name inspired. She thought about her own life, the plans she once had before all of this. She had wanted to open a small design studio, to build something with her own hands rather than inherit it from someone else. Now those dreams felt impossibly far away, like a story that belonged to a different girl entirely. In the morning, a black car arrived outside their home precisely at 9 o'clock. Elena watched from the window as a driver stepped out and opened the rear door, waiting patiently. Her father appeared behind her, dressed in his best suit, though his hands still trembled slightly. "It is time," he said softly. The drive to Ashcroft's estate felt like it took hours, though it was likely no more than 30 minutes. Elena stared out the window at the city passing by, wondering if this would be the last time she saw it as a free woman. When the car finally pulled through iron gates and up a long stone driveway, she caught her first glimpse of the mansion that would soon change her life forever. It was enormous, elegant, and utterly cold, built from gray stone that seemed to absorb sunlight rather than reflect it. They were led inside by a quiet butler named Arthur, who guided them through hallways lined with paintings of stern-faced ancestors. Elena felt as though every portrait was watching her, judging her, wondering what a girl like her was doing in a place like this. Finally, they reached a set of large wooden doors, and Arthur opened them without a word. Inside, seated behind a massive desk, was Damien Ashcroft. He was younger than Elena expected, though his eyes carried the weight of someone far older. He did not stand when they entered. He simply studied them both with an unreadable expression, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Mr. Marchetti," Damien said, his voice smooth and controlled. "And this must be your daughter." Elena lifted her chin, refusing to let him see how frightened she truly was. "Elena," she said firmly. "My name is Elena." Something flickered in Damien's eyes, though it disappeared as quickly as it came. "Elena," he repeated, testing the name as though weighing its value. "I trust your father has explained my offer." "He has," Elena said, "though I would like to hear it directly from you." Damien's lips curved into something that was not quite a smile. He gestured for them to sit, and once they had, he spoke plainly, without any warmth or hesitation. "Your father owes me a debt he cannot repay. I am prepared to erase that debt entirely, along with any interest accrued, on one condition: you will marry me. Publicly, we will be husband and wife. Privately, this will be an arrangement of convenience. I require an heir and a wife who understands her place within society. In exchange, your father keeps his home, his name, and his freedom." Elena felt her throat tighten. "And if I refuse? Then I will collect what is owed to me through every legal means available," Damien said without a trace of cruelty in his tone, which somehow made it worse. "Your father's assets will be seized. His name will carry a shame that follows your family for generations. I do not say this to threaten you. I say this because it is simply the truth." Elena looked at her father, who would not meet her gaze, his shoulders slumped in defeat. She looked back at Damien, searching his face for any sign of hesitation, any flicker of doubt about what he was asking her to sacrifice. She found none. "Why me?" she finally asked. "You could have any woman in this city. Why choose someone you are essentially forcing into this?" Damien leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away, though she refused to give him that satisfaction. "Because I do not want a woman who wants me for my title or my money. I want someone who understands exactly what this arrangement is. No illusions. No pretending. Simply a contract between two people who both benefit." Elena almost laughed at the absurdity of it, the way he spoke of her future, as though it were a business merger, rather than her entire life. But she understood, in that moment, that arguing would change nothing. Damien Ashcroft had already made his decision, and her father had already made his choice the day he signed papers with a man who sold his debt without warning. "I need time to think," she said, though even as she spoke the words, she knew there was no real choice to make. "You have until tomorrow evening," Damien said, standing now for the first time, signaling that their meeting was over. "I suggest you use it wisely." As they left the mansion, Elena felt as though she were walking through a dream that refused to end. Her father tried to speak to her in the car, tried to apologize, tried to explain, but she could not find the words to respond. She simply stared out the window, watching the gray stone estate disappear behind them, knowing that whatever answer she gave tomorrow, her life would never be the same again. That night, she stood in front of her mirror for a long time, studying her own reflection, as though trying to memorize the girl she used to be. Tomorrow, she would give her answer. Tomorrow, she would become Duchess Elena Ashcroft, bound to a man who saw her as nothing more than a solution to a financial problem. But as she turned away from the mirror, something hardened inside her chest, quiet and determined. If Damien Ashcroft believed he was simply acquiring a compliant wife, he had no idea what kind of woman he was about to bring into his home. Elena did not yet know how, or when, but she promised herself one thing as she climbed into bed that night. She would not spend the rest of her life as someone's pawn. Whatever game Damien Ashcroft thought he was playing, she intended to learn its rules faster than he could imagine, and one day, she would be the one holding all the power in this arrangement, not him. For now, she closed her eyes and let sleep take her, unaware of just how long and difficult the road ahead would truly be, and unaware of the secrets waiting for her behind the cold walls of the Ashcroft estate. The morning of her answer arrived faster than Elena had prepared for. She stood in front of the mirror again, smoothing down a simple gray dress, feeling as though she were dressing for a funeral rather than a decision that would define the rest of her life. Her father waited downstairs, pacing near the front door, unable to look her in the eye since the moment they had returned from the Ashcroft estate. "You do not have to do this," Vincent said suddenly, his voice cracking as she descended the staircase. "I can find another way. I can sell what remains. I can beg the bank. I can—" "Papa," Elena said gently, cutting him off before he could spiral further into desperate promises they both knew were empty. "There is no other way. We both understand that. Let us not pretend otherwise." Vincent's eyes filled with tears, but Elena did not have the strength to comfort him. Her own fear sat too heavily in her chest, and she needed every ounce of composure just to walk out that door. The same black car waited outside, the same silent driver holding the door open for her. This time, her father did not come with her. Damien had requested she come alone, a detail that made the entire arrangement feel even colder, even more like a transaction than a courtship. When she arrived at the estate, Arthur greeted her at the door with a polite nod, though his eyes carried something she could not quite name. Pity, perhaps, or simply resignation, as though he had seen other women walk through these halls before her, each one changed by what waited inside. Damien was waiting in the same study, standing near the window this time instead of sitting behind his desk. He turned when she entered, his expression unreadable as always, though his eyes swept over her briefly before returning to her face. "You came alone," he observed. "You asked for me alone," Elena replied evenly, refusing to let her voice betray the nervous energy coursing through her. Damien gestured for her to sit, but Elena remained standing, arms crossed, meeting his gaze directly. If she was going to walk into this arrangement, she intended to do so with her dignity intact, not as some frightened girl trembling before him. "I assume you have made your decision," Damien said. "I have," Elena answered. "I will marry you, but I have conditions of my own." Something shifted in Damien's expression, a flicker of surprise quickly masked by his usual composure. Clearly, he had not expected her to negotiate anything, assuming perhaps that a woman in her position would simply agree to whatever terms he offered without question. "Conditions," he repeated, his tone carefully neutral. "First," Elena said, holding up a finger, "my father's debt is erased completely, in writing, the moment we sign our marriage contract. Not after the wedding, not after some probationary period. Immediately." Damien studied her for a long moment before nodding once. "Agreed. What else?" "Second," Elena continued, "I will play the role you require in public. I will attend your events. I will smile for cameras. I will be the perfect Duchess society expects. But in return, I require a private life of my own. My own space, my own time, and no interference in how I choose to spend it." "That seems reasonable," Damien said, though something in his tone suggested he found her requests almost amusing, as though he had expected her to simply beg for mercy rather than negotiate terms like an equal. "And third," Elena said, her voice hardening slightly, "you will treat me with basic respect. I understand this marriage is not built on affection. I do not expect love from you, and I certainly do not offer it in return. But I will not be treated as property. Duke Ashcroft. I am agreeing to save my father, not to become an object you own." For a moment, silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Damien's eyes narrowed slightly, studying her as though reevaluating everything he thought he understood about the woman standing before him. "You misunderstand me if you believe I intended to treat you as property," Damien said finally, his voice quieter than before. "This marriage benefits us both equally. I require a wife to secure certain business relationships and to eventually provide an heir. You require your father's freedom. Neither of us is obligated to pretend affection we do not feel. But I have no interest in cruelty for its own sake." Elena studied him carefully, searching for any hint of insincerity in his words, though his expression remained as unreadable as ever. Whatever softness might exist beneath that cold exterior, he clearly kept it buried deep enough that even years of practice had made it invisible. "Then we understand each other," Elena said. "We do," Damien replied, extending a hand toward her, an oddly formal gesture, given the intimacy of what they were agreeing to. Elena hesitated only a moment before shaking his hand, feeling the coolness of his fingers against hers, a physical reminder of just how detached this arrangement truly was. There was no warmth in his touch, no comfort, only the cold efficiency of two people sealing a business deal that happened to involve marriage vows. "The wedding will take place in 3 weeks," Damien said, releasing her hand and turning back toward his desk. "My lawyers will draft the contract regarding your father's debt today. You will receive a copy by evening." 3 weeks, Elena repeated, feeling the reality of the timeline settle over her like a heavy blanket. "That seems rather sudden." "I do not see the benefit of prolonging what is already decided," Damien said simply. "The sooner this arrangement is finalized, the sooner both our lives can return to some semblance of normalcy." Elena wanted to argue, wanted to demand more time to process everything happening to her, but she recognized the futility of such a request. Damien Ashcroft was not a man who changed his mind once a decision had been made, and pushing him further would likely accomplish nothing except wasting her own energy. "Very well," she said. 3 weeks. As she turned to leave, Damien's voice stopped her at the door. "Elena," he said, and something in the way he spoke her name made her pause. "I know this is not the life you imagined for yourself. I am not asking you to forgive the circumstances that brought us here, but I will honor the terms we have agreed upon today." Elena turned back to face him, studying his expression for any hint of the man behind the cold exterior he wore like armor. For just a moment, she thought she saw something flicker across his face, something almost resembling regret, though it vanished so quickly she could not be certain she had seen it at all. "I hope you do," she said quietly, before finally walking out of the study and back toward the waiting car. The drive home felt different this time, less like a journey toward doom, and more like the beginning of a strategy she had not yet fully formed. Elena stared out the window, replaying every word of their conversation, searching for any weakness she might exploit, any crack in Damien Ashcroft's carefully constructed exterior. She thought about the flicker of surprise in his eyes when she had negotiated terms, rather than simply agreeing to whatever he demanded. Perhaps he was not accustomed to being challenged, not accustomed to a woman who refused to be merely compliant. If that was true, then perhaps there was more room to maneuver within this arrangement than she initially believed. When she arrived home, her father rushed toward her, searching her face for answers, before she had even removed her coat. "Well?" he asked anxiously. "What happened? What did he say?" "It is done," Elena said simply. "Your debt will be erased. We are to be married in 3 weeks. Vincent's relief was immediate and overwhelming, tears filling his eyes as he embraced her tightly, thanking her repeatedly for a sacrifice she had not truly chosen, but had been forced into by circumstances beyond her control. Elena allowed the embrace, though her mind remained elsewhere, already calculating, already planning. That evening, a courier arrived with a thick envelope bearing the Ashcroft family seal. Inside, Elena found the marriage contract, precisely as Damien had promised, along with documentation confirming her father's debt had been completely erased. She read through every clause carefully, noting the formal, businesslike language throughout, devoid of any sentiment or emotion. As she signed her name at the bottom of the final page, Elena felt something shift inside her, a quiet transformation from frightened girl into someone far more calculating. She was walking into this marriage with her eyes wide open, fully aware of exactly what kind of man she was binding herself to. Whatever Damien Ashcroft believed he was gaining through this arrangement, Elena silently vowed that he would soon discover she was not the passive, grateful bride he expected. She intended to learn everything about him, his business, his secrets, and his weaknesses, and she would use that knowledge however necessary to ensure she never truly belonged to anyone but herself. 3 weeks, she thought, folding the signed contract carefully and placing it in a drawer. 3 weeks to prepare herself for a life she had never asked for, but one she now intended to control on her own terms, no matter what Damien Ashcroft believed he had purchased the day he decided to buy her father's debt. The morning of the wedding arrived, with gray clouds hanging low over the city, as though even the sky refused to celebrate what was about to happen. Elena stood in a private dressing room at the Ashcroft estate, surrounded by attendants who fussed over her gown, her hair, her makeup, treating her like a doll rather than a woman about to make the most significant decision of her life. She barely recognized herself in the mirror. The dress was stunning, an ivory gown embroidered with delicate silver thread, chosen not by her but by Damien's assistant, a sharp woman named Charlotte, who had informed Elena that the Duke preferred certain aesthetics for public appearances. Even her own wedding gown had been selected without her input, another small reminder of exactly how little control she held over her own life. "You look beautiful," Charlotte said, adjusting the veil one final time. "The Duke will be pleased." Elena almost laughed at the absurdity of the comment. She was not marrying a man who cared whether she looked beautiful. She was marrying a man who required a wife capable of performing beauty and grace for cameras and society, nothing more. "Thank you," Elena said simply, not bothering to correct the assumption. Through the window, she could see cars beginning to arrive, elegant guests stepping out in designer suits and gowns, all eager to witness the union of the Ashcroft empire with whatever remained of the Marchetti name. Elena wondered how many of them knew the truth behind this marriage. How many understood that this was not a love story, but a business transaction, disguised in white lace and champagne. A knock sounded at the door, and her father entered, dressed in his finest suit, looking older than she remembered him being just weeks earlier. The stress of recent events had carved new lines into his face, though today he at least appeared calmer, comforted by the knowledge that their family's financial nightmare had finally ended. "You look just like your mother did on her wedding day," Vincent said softly, his voice thick with emotion. Elena felt a lump form in her throat at the mention of her mother, wishing desperately that she could be here now, offering guidance through this impossible situation. "I wish she were here," Elena admitted quietly. "She would be proud of you," Vincent said, taking her hands gently. "For your strength. For everything you have sacrificed to protect our family." Elena nodded, though privately she wondered if her mother would truly be proud of a marriage built entirely on coercion and financial desperation, rather than genuine affection. She pushed the thought aside, knowing there was no benefit in dwelling on what could not be changed. "It is time," Charlotte announced from the doorway, checking an elegant watch on her wrist. The ceremony took place in an enormous garden behind the estate, transformed for the occasion, with white flowers and delicate lighting, despite the overcast sky. Hundreds of guests filled rows of elegant chairs, though Elena recognized almost none of them, understanding instead that most were business associates and society figures important to Damien's public image, rather than genuine friends or family. As she walked down the aisle on her father's arm, Elena kept her eyes forward, refusing to let her nervousness show on her face. Ahead, standing at the altar, in an impeccably tailored black suit, Damien Ashcroft waited, his expression as unreadable as it had been during every previous meeting between them. When she finally reached him, their eyes met, and for just a moment, Elena searched his face for any sign of emotion beneath the careful composure he wore like armor. She found nothing, only the same cold calculation she had witnessed since the very first day they met. The ceremony passed in a blur of formal words and traditional vows, spoken by both of them with practiced precision rather than genuine feeling. When the officiant finally pronounced them husband and wife, polite applause rippled through the crowd, though Elena felt strangely detached from the entire moment, as though watching herself from somewhere far away. The reception that followed was an elaborate affair. filled with expensive champagne and quiet conversations between guests who seemed more interested in networking than celebrating the supposed love between the newlyweds. Elena smiled through countless introductions, shook hands with strangers who congratulated her on securing such a powerful husband, and endured comments that made her stomach turn with their casual cruelty. "You are quite fortunate," one woman told her during the reception, her smile too sharp to be genuine. "Many women would kill for the opportunity you have been given." Elena forced a polite smile in response, though internally, she wondered how this woman would feel if she understood the true circumstances behind this marriage, the debt and desperation that had brought her to this altar, rather than genuine choice or affection. Throughout the evening, Damien remained by her side, playing his role as the devoted husband with practiced ease. Though his touches were mechanical, his smiles calculated for the benefit of cameras rather than genuine warmth. Elena studied him carefully during quiet moments between conversations, trying to understand the man she had just bound herself to for what could potentially be the rest of her life. As the reception finally began winding down, Damien leaned close to her, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "We should retire soon. Appearances must be maintained, but there is no need to prolong tonight further than necessary." Elena nodded, grateful for an excuse to escape the exhausting performance of the evening. They said their final goodbyes to lingering guests before finally making their way toward the private wing of the estate that would now serve as her new home. Once they were alone, walking down a quiet hallway, away from the noise of the reception, Damien's carefully maintained public persona seemed to shift slightly, revealing something more guarded and distant beneath the surface. "Your room is at the end of this corridor," he said, gesturing toward a closed door. "Mine is on the opposite side of the estate. I trust that arrangement suits the terms we agreed upon." "It does," Elena said, relieved despite herself at the clear boundaries he was establishing. "There is one matter we should discuss before tonight ends," Damien continued, stopping outside her door. "Tomorrow, staff will begin treating you as Duchess of this household. You will have authority over certain domestic matters, though major decisions regarding the estate and my business affairs remain entirely my own." "Understood," Elena said, though something in his tone made her curious about the boundaries he seemed determined to establish so firmly between them. "I do not require anything further from you tonight," Damien said, his voice carrying an edge of finality. "Rest well, Duchess Ashcroft." The title felt strange on her ears, foreign, and heavy with implications she was not yet ready to fully understand. She watched him turn and walk away without another word, disappearing down the hallway toward his own private quarters, leaving her alone in an unfamiliar home that now bore her name despite feeling nothing like a home at all. Elena entered her new bedroom, finding it beautifully decorated, though utterly impersonal, filled with expensive furnishings that reflected wealth rather than warmth. She sat on the edge of the enormous bed, finally alone, after hours of performing happiness she did not feel, and allowed herself a moment of quiet exhaustion. She thought about the vows she had spoken just hours earlier, promises made not from love but from necessity, binding her to a man who remained essentially a stranger, despite now sharing her last name. She thought about her father, finally free from the crushing weight of debt that had nearly destroyed their family, and reminded herself why she had agreed to walk this difficult path in the first place. But beneath the exhaustion and uncertainty, that same quiet determination from weeks earlier remained steady within her chest. She had entered this marriage with her eyes open, fully aware of its true nature, and she intended to use every advantage this new position offered her. As Duchess Ashcroft, she would have access to information, resources, and social connections that had previously been entirely out of reach. Whatever Damien believed he had gained through this arrangement, Elena intended to ensure that she gained just as much, if not more, before this strange chapter of her life eventually reached its conclusion. She changed out of her wedding gown slowly, hanging it carefully in an enormous closet that felt far too large for someone still adjusting to this unfamiliar new reality. As she finally climbed into bed, staring up at an unfamiliar ceiling in an unfamiliar home, Elena made herself a quiet promise. She would learn everything about this house, this family, and the man who now called himself her husband. She would understand his weaknesses, his secrets, and the true nature of the empire he had built through fear and calculation. And when the time was right, she would use that knowledge however necessary to reclaim the power he believed he had stripped away from her the day he purchased her father's debt. For now, she closed her eyes, allowing sleep to finally claim her exhausted body, unaware that her new home held far more secrets and dangers than she could have possibly imagined on this strange first night as Duchess Elena Ashcroft. Elena woke before dawn on her first morning as Duchess Ashcroft, disoriented by the unfamiliar ceiling above her and the strange silence surrounding the enormous house. For a moment, she forgot where she was, until the weight of everything that had happened the previous day came rushing back to her all at once. She rose slowly, wrapping herself in a robe before wandering toward the window that overlooked the estate's sprawling grounds. Mist clung to the gardens below, giving the entire property an eerie, almost haunted quality that matched the mood settling over her chest. This was her home now, though nothing about it felt welcoming or familiar. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts, and an older woman entered carrying a tray of tea and breakfast items. She introduced herself as Nora, one of the longest-serving members of the household staff, her kind eyes offering a warmth that Elena had not yet encountered within these cold stone walls. "Good morning, Duchess," Nora said gently, setting the tray down near the window. "I hope you slept well." "As well as could be expected," Elena admitted, appreciating the older woman's genuine kindness after enduring so much cold formality since arriving at this estate. "The Duke has already left for business meetings this morning," Nora informed her. "He asked that I show you around the estate whenever you feel ready." Elena nodded, grateful for the opportunity to explore her new surroundings without Damien's watchful presence complicating things further. After finishing her breakfast, she followed Nora through the sprawling mansion, learning the layout of countless rooms filled with expensive furniture and priceless artwork that felt more like a museum than an actual home. As they walked, Elena found herself asking careful questions, testing how much information Nora might be willing to share about the family and household she now belonged to. "How long have you worked for the Ashcroft family?" Elena asked casually. "Nearly 30 years now," Nora replied, her expression softening with memories. "I started when the Duke's father still ran this estate. I watched young Damien grow up within these very walls." "What was he like as a child?" Elena asked, genuinely curious despite herself. Nora hesitated for a moment before answering carefully. "He was different once, warmer, kinder, always curious about the world beyond these gates. Something changed him over the years, though it is not really my place to discuss such matters." Elena filed this information away carefully, sensing there was far more history here than anyone seemed willing to openly discuss. She continued the tour in relative silence, absorbing details about the household while quietly building a mental map of the estate and its many secrets. Later that afternoon, while exploring a quiet library on the estate's second floor, Elena discovered a locked cabinet tucked away in the corner, seemingly forgotten among shelves of leather-bound books. Curiosity overcame caution, and she found herself testing the lock gently, though it remained firmly secured against her efforts. "That cabinet belonged to the previous Duchess," a voice said suddenly from the doorway, startling Elena badly enough that she nearly knocked over a nearby lamp. She turned to find Arthur, the butler, standing quietly nearby, his expression carefully neutral despite the weight behind his words. "Previous Duchess," Elena repeated slowly, her curiosity intensifying immediately. "I was not aware Damien had been married before." Arthur's expression flickered briefly before returning to its usual composed state. "It is not something discussed openly within this household, Duchess. Perhaps it would be best to ask the Duke directly, should you wish to know more." Elena nodded, though she suspected Damien would offer even less information than his own staff seemed willing to provide. She thanked Arthur for his honesty and continued exploring, though her mind now buzzed with questions about this mysterious previous wife no one seemed willing to discuss. That evening, Damien returned from his business meetings looking exhausted, his usual composed exterior slightly frayed around the edges. They shared a quiet, formal dinner together in a massive dining room clearly designed for entertaining dozens of guests rather than intimate conversations between two people, bound by circumstance rather than affection. "How was your first day exploring your new home?" Damien asked, his tone polite, though lacking any genuine warmth. "Enlightening," Elena replied carefully, watching his reaction closely. "I learned quite a bit about this estate and its history." Something flickered briefly across Damien's face, though he quickly masked it with his usual composed expression. I trust the staff have been helpful in orienting you. Very helpful, Elena said, deciding to test the waters further. I understand there was a previous Duchess. The reaction was immediate and unmistakable this time. Damien's hand tightened slightly around his wine glass, his jaw clenching almost imperceptibly, before he regained control over his expression. That is not a topic I discuss, he said, his voice carrying a warning edge that had not been present moments earlier. I apologize if the question was inappropriate, Elena said, though she made no genuine effort to sound sincerely apologetic. I simply thought, as your wife, I deserve to understand the history of this household. Damien set down his glass carefully, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away, though she forced herself to maintain eye contact, refusing to be intimidated by his obvious discomfort. Some matters are better left in the past, Damien said finally, his voice quieter now, almost distant. I would appreciate if you did not pursue this particular subject further. Elena nodded slowly, recognizing the futility of pushing him further tonight, though her curiosity had only intensified rather than diminished. Whatever had happened to this previous Duchess clearly still affected Damien deeply, buried beneath layers of careful control that occasionally cracked when the topic arose unexpectedly. The rest of dinner passed in relative silence, both of them retreating into their own thoughts, rather than continuing any meaningful conversation. When the meal finally ended, Damien excused himself quickly, disappearing into his private study without another word, leaving Elena alone with countless unanswered questions swirling through her mind. Over the following days, Elena continued exploring the estate carefully, gathering small pieces of information whenever opportunities presented themselves. She learned from various staff members, speaking carefully and never directly, that the previous Duchess had left the estate somewhat suddenly several years earlier, though no one seemed entirely certain of the exact circumstances surrounding her departure. Some staff members hinted at rumors of infidelity, others suggested financial disputes, while a few simply refused to discuss the matter entirely, their expressions closing off immediately whenever the topic arose. The inconsistency in these stories only deepened Elena's suspicion that something far more complicated than simple divorce had occurred within these walls. She began spending time in the estate's extensive library, searching through old newspapers and society magazines for any mention of Damien's previous marriage, hoping to piece together fragments of truth from public records, rather than relying solely on unreliable rumors from staff members too frightened to speak openly. During one such research session, she discovered an old newspaper article mentioning Damien's marriage to a woman named Isabel, describing their union as one of the most celebrated events within high society circles at the time. The article included a photograph of a beautiful young woman standing beside a noticeably younger, though equally cold-looking, Damien Ashcroft. Elena studied the photograph carefully, searching Isabel's expression for any hints about the woman's true feelings toward this marriage. Something about her smile seemed forced, almost identical to expressions Elena herself had practiced extensively for photographers throughout her own recent wedding ceremony. As she continued searching through subsequent editions, Elena noticed the sudden absence of any further mentions regarding Isabel after a certain point, as though the woman had simply vanished from public record entirely. No divorce announcements, no scandal reports, nothing beyond a strange and sudden silence that felt deeply unsettling, given everything else she had learned. Elena closed the newspaper archive carefully, her mind racing with implications she was not yet ready to fully process. Whatever had happened to Isabel, it seemed clear that Damien Ashcroft's carefully constructed public image concealed far darker secrets than anyone within society seemed willing to acknowledge openly. That night, lying awake in her enormous, impersonal bedroom, Elena felt a new resolve solidifying within her chest. She had entered this marriage intending simply to protect her family and eventually reclaim some measure of personal power. But now, understanding that something deeply troubling had happened to the woman who occupied this position before her, Elena felt an additional weight settling over her shoulders. She needed to understand exactly what had happened to Isabel, not merely for her own curiosity, but because she suspected her own safety and future might depend entirely on uncovering the truth behind whatever had truly transpired within these cold stone walls before she ever arrived. Whatever secrets Damien Ashcroft was hiding behind his careful composure and calculated business empire, Elena now understood that discovering them had become absolutely necessary, both for her own protection and for whatever justice might still be owed to the woman who had apparently vanished so completely from this house and from public memory entirely. Weeks passed, and Elena settled into a careful rhythm within the Ashcroft estate, playing the role of dutiful duchess in public, while quietly continuing her private investigation whenever opportunities allowed. She attended charity events alongside Damien, smiled for photographers, and hosted small gatherings for society women who seemed endlessly curious about her sudden rise into their exclusive circles. Despite the careful distance both she and Damien maintained, Elena began noticing small contradictions in his behavior that intrigued her more than she cared to admit. One evening, returning from a business dinner earlier than expected, she found him standing alone in the garden, staring up at the night sky, with an expression of such profound sadness that she nearly turned away, rather than intrude upon what felt like an intensely private moment. "Duke Ashcroft," she said softly, announcing her presence rather than continuing to observe him unnoticed. Damien turned quickly, his expression shifting instantly back into its usual guarded composure, though not quite fast enough to hide the vulnerability she had briefly witnessed. "Duchess," he replied, his voice carefully neutral, "I did not expect you home so early." "The dinner ended sooner than anticipated," Elena said, studying him carefully. "Is everything all right? You seem troubled." "I am simply tired," Damien said, though his tone lacked conviction. "Business matters weigh heavily some evenings." Elena considered pressing further, but decided against it, sensing that pushing too hard would only cause him to retreat further behind his careful walls. Instead, she remained quiet, standing beside him, as they both looked up at the stars, an unexpected moment of shared silence that felt strangely comfortable, despite everything unresolved between them. "My father used to bring me out here when I was young," Damien said suddenly, surprising her with the unprompted admission, "before everything became so complicated." "What happened?" Elena asked gently, careful not to spook him away from this rare moment of openness. Damien was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tightening slightly, as though debating how much to reveal. "My father built this empire through fear and calculation, believing emotion was simply weakness that could be exploited by enemies. He taught me the same lessons, whether I wanted to learn them or not." "That sounds like a lonely way to grow up," Elena said softly. "It was necessary," Damien replied, though something in his voice suggested he was trying to convince himself as much as her. "Sentiment leads to vulnerability, and vulnerability leads to destruction. I learned that lesson quite thoroughly." Elena wanted desperately to ask about Isabel in that moment, wondering if this lesson connected somehow to whatever had happened to his previous wife. But she recognized the fragility of this unexpected openness, and chose instead to simply nod, allowing the silence to stretch between them without further interrogation. "Good night, Duke Ashcroft," she finally said, deciding not to push her luck further tonight. "Damien," he said suddenly, stopping her before she could turn away. "You may call me Damien, if you wish. Given our circumstances, such formality seems somewhat unnecessary between us now." Elena felt something shift slightly within their strange, distant relationship at this small gesture. "Then you may call me Elena," she replied, offering a small, genuine smile, despite everything complicated between them. Over the following weeks, small moments like this began accumulating between them, tiny cracks appearing within Damien's carefully maintained composure whenever they found themselves alone together, without the pressure of public performance. Elena began to suspect that beneath his cold exterior existed a man deeply wounded by something in his past, someone who had built emotional walls, not from genuine cruelty, but from some deep-seated fear of vulnerability. Yet despite these small glimpses of humanity, Elena never forgot her primary purpose within this marriage. She continued her careful investigation whenever Damien traveled for business, using those opportunities to explore restricted areas of the estate and search through documents that might reveal more about his past and his business dealings. During one such exploration, while Damien attended a week-long business trip overseas, Elena discovered a hidden filing room adjacent to his private study, its door cleverly disguised as part of the wooden paneling throughout the room. Her heart raced as she slipped inside, finding rows of carefully organized files, documenting years of business transactions and acquisitions. She began searching through the files methodically, careful to leave everything exactly as she found it. searching specifically for any documentation related to her father's original debt or any mention of Isabel's departure from the estate. Hours passed as she sorted through countless documents, her frustration mounting as she found nothing directly relevant to either mystery. Just as she prepared to abandon her search for the evening, exhaustion weighing heavily on her shoulders, Elena noticed a file tucked away in the back corner of a cabinet, labeled simply with her father's company name. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled it free, opening it carefully to reveal documents that made her blood run cold. The file contained detailed records showing Damien's involvement in several failed investments that had initially destabilized her father's business. Transactions carefully disguised through intermediary companies designed to hide any direct connection to the Ashcroft name. Elena's mind raced as she processed the implications of what she was seeing, understanding for the first time that her father's downfall might not have been simple bad luck or poor decisions. She continued searching desperately through the remaining documents, finding additional evidence suggesting Damien had orchestrated multiple business failures over recent years, all connected somehow to families with historical ties to some earlier conflict she did not yet fully understand. Her father's name appeared alongside several others, all seemingly targeted through similarly disguised financial manipulation. Elena carefully photographed several key documents using her phone, ensuring she preserved evidence of what she had discovered before returning everything precisely to its original position within the filing cabinet. Her hands shook as she closed the hidden room behind her, her mind racing with implications too enormous to fully process in this single moment. Had her father's debt truly been an accident, simple misfortune resulting from poor business decisions, or had Damien Ashcroft deliberately engineered his downfall as part of some larger, more calculated scheme? And if that were true, what possible reason could explain such elaborate, targeted destruction against her family specifically? That night, Elena lay awake in her bedroom, staring at the ceiling as countless questions swirled through her mind without resolution. She thought about the vulnerable moment she had shared with Damien in the garden just weeks earlier, wondering now if that brief glimpse of humanity had been genuine or simply another calculated performance designed to lower her guard. She needed more information before confronting him directly with her suspicions. Whatever connection existed between her father's downfall and Damien's business empire, Elena understood that revealing her knowledge prematurely could prove dangerous, especially if her suspicions about his ruthless nature toward business rivals proved entirely accurate. For now, she would continue playing her careful role as dutiful Duchess, gathering evidence patiently while searching for the deeper truth behind everything that had brought her into this strange, complicated marriage. Whatever game Damien Ashcroft believed he was playing, Elena now understood that the stakes were far higher and far more personal than she had ever initially imagined, and she intended to uncover every remaining secret before deciding her next move within this dangerous chess match neither of them could afford to lose. Elena spent the following weeks moving carefully through her new life, outwardly the picture of a composed duchess, while secretly piecing together the puzzle hidden within Damien's private files. She reached out quietly to an old family friend, a retired accountant named Henry Cole, who had once worked closely with her father before his business collapsed. She invited him to tea under the pretense of catching up on old times, though her true purpose was far more urgent. "Henry, I need your help with something delicate," Elena said, once they were settled in a quiet corner of a small cafe, away from prying eyes. "I need you to look into some old business dealings connected to my father's company, before everything fell apart." Henry studied her carefully, sensing the seriousness behind her request. "What exactly are you looking for, Elena?" She slid a folded piece of paper across the table, containing details she had carefully copied from the documents in Damien's hidden files. "I want to know who was really behind these transactions. The names on paper are shell companies, but I believe there is a connection to someone specific." Henry unfolded the paper, his eyebrows rising as he scanned the information. "This will take some time, and some careful digging. Are you certain you want to pursue this?" "I need to know the truth," Elena said firmly, "whatever it costs." Over the following 2 weeks, Henry worked quietly through old records and financial trails, calling Elena periodically with small updates as he uncovered pieces of the puzzle. Each conversation added another layer of confirmation to what Elena had already begun to suspect, though the full picture remained frustratingly incomplete. Finally, Henry requested an urgent meeting, his voice tight with concern over the phone. When Elena arrived at their usual quiet cafe, She found him waiting with a thick folder of documents, his expression grave. "Elena, what I found troubles me deeply," Henry said, sliding the folder toward her. "Your father's company did not fail through simple bad luck. Every failed investment, every bad deal that led to his downfall, traces back through several shell companies to a single source." Elena's hands trembled slightly as she opened the folder, scanning through pages of financial records, wire transfers, and corporate filings that Henry had painstakingly assembled. "Damien," she whispered, though she had already suspected this truth for weeks. "There is more," Henry continued gently. "This was not an isolated incident. I found evidence of similar patterns affecting at least 3 other families over the past several years, all businessmen with connections to a man named Alistair Whitmore, who worked closely with Damien's father decades ago." "Who is Alistair Whitmore?" Elena asked, her mind racing to connect these scattered pieces of information. "He was a business partner of the elder Duke Ashcroft," Henry explained. "According to old records, there was a falling out between them, something involving a major financial scandal that nearly destroyed the Ashcroft family's reputation entirely. Alistair Whitmore was blamed publicly, though rumors suggested the elder Ashcroft himself orchestrated the entire scheme and simply used his partner as a scapegoat." Elena felt a chill settle over her as pieces finally began clicking into place. "And my father worked with Alistair Whitmore at some point." "Your father was mentored early in his career by Whitmore," Henry confirmed, "along with the other men whose businesses Damien seems to have deliberately targeted and destroyed over recent years." Elena sat back in her chair, processing the enormity of what she had just learned. This was not simply bad luck or unfortunate timing. Damien Ashcroft had deliberately, methodically, destroyed her father's business as part of some elaborate, decades-old revenge scheme, connected to whatever scandal had once threatened his own family's reputation. "He never wanted a wife," Elena said quietly, almost to herself. "He wanted the final piece of his revenge." "I am sorry, Elena," Henry said softly, watching her carefully. "I know this is not what you hoped to discover." Elena forced herself to remain composed, though anger and betrayal churned violently within her chest. She thanked Henry for his careful work, promising to compensate him generously for his time and discretion, before making her way back toward the Ashcroft estate, with newfound clarity about the true nature of her marriage. The drive home felt endless, as she replayed every interaction with Damien since their very first meeting, understanding now that his careful calculation had never truly been about securing a suitable wife or heir. She had simply been the final target in an elaborate scheme designed to complete whatever revenge he sought against the men connected to his family's old scandal. That evening, Elena found herself unable to face Damien directly at dinner, claiming a headache to avoid their usual formal meal together. She retreated to her bedroom instead, staring at the folder Henry had given her, rereading every document until the words blurred together from exhaustion and unshed tears she refused to release. She thought about the moment in the garden when Damien had shown genuine vulnerability, wondering now whether that moment had been real or simply another calculated performance designed to earn her trust and lower her guard against exactly this kind of discovery. The uncertainty made her feel foolish, forever believing there might be genuine humanity hidden beneath his cold exterior. Over the following days, Elena struggled to maintain her composure whenever Damien was present, though she forced herself to continue behaving normally, understanding that revealing her knowledge prematurely would only give him opportunity to prepare countermeasures against whatever she eventually decided to do with this devastating information. She began quietly reaching out to other contacts, carefully building a network of allies who might prove useful once she decided how to confront the truth she had uncovered. She reconnected with old family friends, cultivated new relationships within society circles, and began learning as much as possible about Damien's current business dealings and vulnerabilities. During one particularly tense dinner, Damien seemed to notice her distant behavior, studying her with unusual intensity throughout the meal. "You seem troubled lately, Elena," he observed carefully. "Is something bothering you?" Elena forced a small smile, masking the turmoil churning beneath her calm exterior. "Simply adjusting to everything still. This life remains quite different from what I once knew." Damien studied her for a moment longer, as though searching for something beneath her carefully composed response, before finally nodding and returning his attention to his meal. Elena felt relief wash over her that he had not pressed further. though she understood this reprieve would likely prove temporary, given his evident perceptiveness. That night, alone in her bedroom once again, Elena made a quiet, determined decision. She would not confront Damien immediately with what she had discovered. Instead, she would use this knowledge carefully, patiently building her own position of strength within this dangerous game he had unknowingly begun the moment he purchased her father's debt. Whatever revenge Damien Ashcroft believed he had successfully executed against her family, Elena now understood that she possessed the power to expose everything, to destroy the very empire he had built through manipulation and calculated cruelty. But she would wait for the right moment, ensuring her own position remained secure before revealing the devastating truth she now carried within her heart like a carefully guarded weapon. For the first time since this entire nightmare began, Elena felt something resembling genuine power settling over her exhausted shoulders. She was no longer simply a pawn trapped within someone else's carefully orchestrated game. She was quietly becoming a player in her own right, and she intended to ensure that when this game finally reached its conclusion, she would be the one standing victorious, not the cold, calculating man who had believed he could purchase her future without ever facing consequences for the true cruelty behind his actions. Elena decided she could no longer carry the weight of her discovery alone, the truth pressing so heavily against her chest that she found herself struggling to maintain the composed facade she had perfected over recent weeks. Late one evening, after the household staff had retired for the night, she made her way toward Damien's private study, the folder of evidence clutched tightly in her hands. She found him working at his desk, papers scattered before him, his expression focused entirely on whatever business matter currently occupied his attention. He looked up as she entered, surprise flickering briefly across his face at her unexpected visit to this part of the estate so late in the evening. "Elena," he said, setting down his pen, "is something wrong?" "We need to talk," Elena said firmly, closing the door behind her before crossing the room to stand directly before his desk. Something in her tone must have alerted him to the seriousness of the moment, because Damien's expression shifted immediately, his usual composed mask sliding into place, as though preparing for confrontation. "What is this regarding?" Without another word, Elena placed the folder on his desk, watching his face carefully as he opened it slowly, his eyes scanning the documents inside. She observed the exact moment recognition dawned across his features, followed swiftly by something resembling genuine alarm, quickly suppressed beneath his usual careful control. "Where did you get these documents?" Damien asked, his voice carefully neutral, despite the tension evident in his rigid posture. "Does it matter?" Elena replied. "What matters is that I know the truth now. My father's debt was never simply bad luck or poor business decisions. You deliberately orchestrated his downfall, along with several other families, as part of some revenge scheme connected to whatever scandal happened between your father and Alistair Whitmore decades ago." Damien's jaw tightened, his hands gripping the edge of his desk, as though physically restraining himself from some stronger reaction. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken tension neither seemed willing to break first. "You do not understand the full context," Damien finally said, his voice quieter than she expected. "Then explain it to me," Elena demanded. "Explain why you destroyed my father's life, why you forced me into this marriage, under false pretenses, pretending this was simply about securing a suitable wife and heir, when really, it was always about completing your revenge." Damien stood slowly, moving toward the window, his back turned to her as he seemed to gather his thoughts before finally speaking. "Alistair Whitmore was not simply my father's business partner. He was supposed to be like family to us. When financial scandal threatened to destroy everything my father had built, Whitmore turned against him, providing false testimony that shifted public blame entirely onto my father, instead of accepting responsibility for decisions they had made together. That still does not explain why you targeted my father specifically," Elena said, refusing to let sympathy soften her anger. "He was simply mentored by Whitmore early in his career. What did he have to do with whatever happened between your families decades ago?" Damien turned back to face her, his expression carrying genuine pain now, though Elena forced herself to remain skeptical of whether this vulnerability was authentic or simply another calculated performance. "Your father knew the truth. He worked closely enough with Whitmore during that period that he understood exactly what really happened, yet he remained silent, allowing false narratives to destroy my family's reputation, rather than risk his own career by speaking honestly. Elena felt her resolve waver slightly at this new information, though she quickly reminded herself that even if this were true, it did not justify the elaborate cruelty Damien had inflicted upon her father, nor the manipulation he had used to force her into this marriage under entirely false pretenses. Even if that is true, Elena said firmly, you had no right to destroy his life, no right to force me into a marriage built on lies and manipulation. You could have confronted him directly, sought answers, or even confrontation, through honest means, rather than orchestrating years of calculated financial destruction against families who may have simply made mistakes during difficult circumstances. You are right, Damien said quietly, surprising her with his sudden admission. I allowed anger and old wounds to consume me, believing that destroying those connected to my family's downfall would somehow heal the damage done decades ago. It did not. It simply created new pain, new betrayal, without ever truly addressing what actually happened between our families. Elena studied him carefully, searching for any hint of manipulation within his admission, though something about his exhausted, defeated posture suggested genuine remorse rather than calculated performance. Still, she could not allow herself to soften completely, not when so much damage had already been done to her family and to the other victims caught within his elaborate revenge scheme. What happens now? Elena asked, her voice steadier than she felt internally. I do not know, Damien admitted. I understand. You have every right to feel betrayed, to seek whatever consequences you believe are warranted for everything I have done. I will not stop you from taking this evidence public, if that is what you decide. Elena had not expected such surrender, and it left her feeling uncertain about her next steps. Part of her wanted immediate justice, wanted to expose everything publicly, and watch his carefully built empire crumble, as punishment for the pain he had caused her family. Yet another part of her, quieter and more calculating, recognized that acting impulsively now might not yield the results she truly desired. I need time to decide what I will do with this information, Elena finally said. But understand this, Damien. I will not simply forgive what you have done, nor will I continue playing the role of naive, grateful wife while pretending none of this happened. I understand, Damien said quietly. Whatever you decide, I will accept the consequences of my actions. Elena turned to leave, though Damien's voice stopped her once more, before she reached the door. For what it is worth, he said softly, the vulnerability you witnessed in the garden that evening was genuine. Whatever else has happened between us, that moment was not calculated or false. Elena did not respond, uncertain whether she could trust anything he told her anymore, though something in his tone made her want desperately to believe him despite everything. She left the study without another word, her mind racing with implications and possibilities regarding what her next move should truly be. Over the following days, Elena found herself reconsidering her original plan of simply destroying Damien publicly through immediate exposure. While justice for her father and the other affected families remained her ultimate goal, she began recognizing an opportunity for something potentially more powerful and strategic than simple, immediate revenge. If Damien's admission of guilt was genuine, if his remorse held any true sincerity, perhaps she could leverage this newfound vulnerability to ensure not just punishment, but genuine restoration for everyone he had harmed throughout his misguided quest for revenge. She began quietly planning her next steps, understanding that whatever she decided would require careful strategy rather than impulsive action. Whatever Damien Ashcroft believed about consequences and justice, Elena now understood that she held tremendous power within this situation, power she intended to wield carefully and deliberately, ensuring that when her plan finally reached its conclusion, true justice would be served, not just for her own family, but for everyone else who had suffered because of his calculated, misguided pursuit of revenge against people who may have simply been innocent bystanders, caught within decades-old family conflicts they barely understood themselves. Elena began her careful preparations quietly, understanding that whatever plan she ultimately pursued would require resources and allies far beyond what she currently possessed. She reached out first to the other families Henry had identified as victims of Damien's elaborate revenge scheme, arranging discreet meetings under carefully constructed pretenses to avoid drawing unwanted attention. Her first meeting took place with a woman named Grace Bennett, whose family business had collapsed under circumstances remarkably similar to her own father's downfall. They met at a quiet restaurant across town, far from the social circles where either of them might be recognized by mutual acquaintances connected to Damien's world. "I appreciate you agreeing to meet with me," Elena said carefully, studying the other woman's guarded expression. "Your message mentioned information about my father's business failure," Grace said, her tone cautious. "I confess I am uncertain why the Duchess of Ashcroft would be interested in ancient history regarding my family's misfortune." Elena took a steadying breath before revealing the evidence Henry had uncovered, watching Grace's expression shift from skepticism to shock as she processed the implications of what Elena was sharing with her. By the time Elena finished explaining everything, Grace's hands were trembling slightly around her coffee cup. "You are certain about this?" Grace asked quietly. "Certain that Damien Ashcroft deliberately destroyed my father's company?" "I have documentation," Elena confirmed. "And I believe there are others who suffered similarly." Grace sat in stunned silence for several long moments before finally speaking again. "What do you intend to do with this information?" "I am building a case," Elena said carefully. "Not simply for public exposure, though that may eventually become necessary, but for genuine accountability and restoration for everyone affected by his actions." Over the following weeks, Elena continued reaching out carefully to other affected families, gradually building a network of allies who shared her determination to seek justice against Damien's calculated cruelty. Each meeting added new pieces to her growing case, additional evidence, and personal testimonies that strengthened her position considerably. She also began cultivating relationships with several of Damien's business rivals, men and women who had long suspected foul play behind their own competitive struggles against the Ashcroft empire, though none had previously possessed concrete evidence to support their suspicions. Elena carefully shared select pieces of information with these contacts, building alliances that would prove valuable once she finally decided to move forward with her larger plan. One particularly valuable ally emerged in the form of Edward Whitmore, grandson of the very Alistair Whitmore whose historical conflict with Damien's father had apparently sparked this entire chain of revenge and betrayal. Edward had grown up hearing his grandfather's version of events, entirely different from whatever narrative Damien believed to be true. "My grandfather always maintained his innocence," Edward told Elena during their first careful meeting. "He claimed the elder Duke Ashcroft orchestrated the entire scandal himself, using my grandfather as a convenient scapegoat to protect his own reputation and business interests." "Do you have evidence supporting this version of events?" Elena asked, recognizing the potential significance of this information. "Some," Edward admitted. "Documents my grandfather kept before he passed away, hidden away for years, out of fear, regarding what the Ashcroft family might do if they discovered he retained proof of his innocence." Elena felt her strategy solidifying further with each new piece of information and alliance she cultivated. If Edward's evidence proved accurate, it would mean that Damien's entire revenge scheme had been built upon a fundamentally flawed premise, his own father having deliberately deceived him about the true nature of events that occurred decades earlier. This revelation could prove devastating, not just to Damien's public reputation, but to his entire understanding of his own family history and the justification he had used to excuse years of calculated cruelty against innocent families like her own. Throughout this period of careful planning, Elena maintained her outward composure whenever interacting with Damien, though their relationship had shifted noticeably since their confrontation in his study. He seemed more subdued, less guarded in certain unexpected moments, as though genuinely wrestling with the consequences of his past actions, rather than simply performing remorse for her benefit. One evening, he approached her unexpectedly in the garden, the same location where she had once witnessed his genuine vulnerability months earlier. "I have been thinking about everything you said," Damien told her quietly. "About taking responsibility, about making things right with the families I have harmed." "What are you proposing?" Elena asked carefully, curious despite her lingering distrust. "I want to help reverse some of the damage I have caused," Damien said. "Financial restitution, business opportunities restored, whatever might genuinely help repair what my actions have destroyed." Elena studied him carefully, wondering if this represented genuine transformation or simply another calculated attempt to minimize consequences before she decided how to proceed with her evidence. Yet something about his exhausted, sincere expression made her want to believe this shift was authentic. I appreciate that sentiment, Elena said carefully, but actions will speak louder than words at this point. If you are truly committed to making amends, prove it through concrete steps rather than simply expressing good intentions. I understand, Damien said. Tell me what you require, and I will do everything within my power to make it happen. Elena considered his offer carefully over the following days, ultimately deciding to test his sincerity through smaller acts of restoration before revealing the full extent of her carefully constructed alliance network. If Damien genuinely intended to make amends, this would provide valuable evidence supporting genuine transformation, information that could prove useful regardless of how her larger plan eventually unfolded. She provided him with several names, families whose businesses had suffered under his calculated schemes, watching carefully to see whether he would follow through with meaningful restitution or simply offer empty promises designed to placate her temporarily. To her surprise, within days, Damien began quietly reaching out to these affected families, offering genuine financial restitution and business opportunities, without any public acknowledgement or fanfare that might otherwise serve his own reputation. Elena received confirmation from several of her carefully cultivated allies that Damien's outreach appeared genuine, his offers substantial and unconditional. This unexpected development complicated her original plan considerably, forcing Elena to reconsider whether her goal should remain focused on public destruction and exposure, or whether genuine restoration and accountability might ultimately prove more beneficial for everyone affected by this complicated situation. Yet despite these positive developments, Elena refused to abandon her carefully built network of alliances and evidence entirely. She understood that trust, once so thoroughly broken, could not be rebuilt through good intentions alone, and she intended to maintain her position of strength within this relationship, regardless of whatever genuine transformation Damien seemed to be undergoing. Whatever ultimate outcome awaited this complicated situation, Elena remained determined to ensure that true justice, true accountability, would define the conclusion of this story, rather than simply allowing calculated revenge or convenient forgiveness to overshadow the genuine harm caused throughout this entire elaborate scheme of manipulation and betrayal that had begun the moment Damien Ashcroft decided to purchase her father's debt as the final piece of his misguided pursuit of vengeance. The annual Ashcroft Charity Gala arrived with its usual fanfare, hundreds of guests filling the estate's grand ballroom, champagne flowing freely while string musicians played softly in the background. Elena moved through the crowd in a stunning emerald gown, playing her role as gracious hostess with practiced ease, though her mind remained sharply focused on a conversation she had overheard just hours earlier that threatened to unravel everything she had carefully constructed. Edward Whitmore had contacted her that afternoon, his voice tight with urgency over the phone. Elena, someone else has gotten hold of the documents about my grandfather. A journalist named Vincent Price has been asking questions, and I fear he intends to publish everything tonight, during your gala, for maximum impact. Elena's stomach had dropped at this news. If a journalist broke this story publicly, without context or careful framing, it would likely destroy not just Damien's reputation, but potentially harm the very families she had worked so hard to help restore over recent months. Worse, if the story emerged without her control, it might paint Damien as an unrepentant villain, rather than acknowledging his genuine, if imperfect, attempts at making amends. Now, standing amid the glittering crowd, Elena scanned the room carefully, watching for any sign of the journalist Edward had warned her about. She spotted him near the bar, a sharp-eyed man taking careful notes while pretending to enjoy his drink, clearly waiting for the right moment to cause maximum disruption. She made her way toward Damien, who stood speaking with several business associates, his expression composed despite whatever quiet transformation had been occurring within him over recent weeks. "Damien," she said quietly, pulling him aside from his conversation. "We have a problem. A journalist is here tonight, and he knows about the Whitmore situation. He intends to publish everything, without any context regarding your recent efforts to make amends." Damien's face paled slightly, though he maintained his composure remarkably well given the circumstances. How did he obtain this information? "I do not know," Elena admitted, "but we need to decide how to handle this before he takes matters into his own hands." Damien studied her carefully for a long moment. "What do you suggest?" Elena took a deep breath, understanding that this moment represented a crucial turning point. not just for Damien's reputation, but for everything she had worked toward since discovering the truth about her father's downfall. I think we should control the narrative ourselves, tonight, before he has the chance to twist everything into something far more damaging than the truth actually warrants. You want me to publicly admit everything, Damien said slowly, understanding dawning across his features. Here, tonight, in front of everyone. I believe it is the only way to ensure the true story is told accurately, Elena said firmly. Not a story of simple villainy, but one of genuine accountability and attempted restoration. The families you have harmed deserve acknowledgement, but they also deserve to know about your efforts to make things right. Damien was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with the enormity of what she was suggesting. Finally, he nodded slowly. You are right. I have spent too long hiding behind calculated control and careful manipulation. Perhaps it is time I face the consequences of my actions honestly, in front of everyone. Elena felt a mixture of relief and anxiety as Damien made his way toward a small stage, typically reserved for charity announcements and toasts. He requested the microphone from a startled event coordinator, and gradually, conversations throughout the ballroom quieted as guests turned their attention toward the unexpected interruption. Thank you all for joining us this evening, Damien began, his voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent room. Before we continue with tonight's festivities, I have something important to share, something I should have addressed honestly, a very long time ago. Elena watched from the edge of the crowd as Damien proceeded to explain, with remarkable honesty, the decades-old scandal involving his father and Alistair Whitmore, his own misguided pursuit of revenge against innocent families, and the genuine efforts he had recently undertaken to make amends for the harm he had caused. The room remained utterly silent throughout his confession, shock and disbelief evident on countless faces as they absorbed this unexpected revelation. The journalist, Vincent Price, stood frozen near the bar, clearly stunned that his intended exposure had been preemptively claimed by Damien himself, robbing his story of its intended dramatic impact. Elena watched him lower his notebook slowly, recognizing that whatever narrative he had planned to construct now held far less power given Damien's own honest admission. When Damien finally finished speaking, an uncomfortable silence stretched across the ballroom before Elena stepped forward, joining him near the small stage. I can confirm everything Damien has shared tonight, Elena said, her voice steady, despite the weight of the moment. My own father was among those affected by this situation. I understand the pain and betrayal these revelations represent, but I also believe that genuine accountability, genuine effort toward restoration, deserves recognition, alongside acknowledgement of past wrongs. She then invited Grace Bennett and several other affected family members, who had been quietly present at the gala as her personal guests, to share their own experiences regarding both the harm caused and the restitution efforts Damien had recently undertaken. Their testimonies, delivered with raw honesty, painted a complicated picture of genuine wrongdoing, followed by sincere attempts at making amends. By the end of the evening, the story that emerged was far more nuanced than simple villainy or convenient forgiveness. Guests left the gala buzzing with conversation, though the narrative dominating their discussions centered on redemption and accountability, rather than pure scandal and destruction. In the days that followed, news outlets did report on the revelations from Damien's gala confession, though the story that emerged publicly reflected the complicated truth Elena had worked so hard to ensure was told accurately. Some praised Damien's unprecedented honesty and restitution efforts, while others rightfully criticized the years of calculated harm he had caused, before finally choosing transparency and accountability. Elena found herself navigating an unexpected new reality following the gala, one where her marriage to Damien had transformed from a purely transactional arrangement into something far more complicated and genuine, built now upon shared honesty rather than manipulation and hidden agendas. Yet despite this evolution in their relationship, Elena understood that trust, once so thoroughly broken by his initial deception, could not be fully restored overnight. She maintained her careful vigilance, continuing to monitor Damien's ongoing efforts at genuine restitution, while ensuring that her own hard-won independence and personal power remained firmly secured, regardless of whatever future awaited their complicated marriage. Whatever path lay ahead for Elena and Damien, one truth remained undeniable. The cold, calculating Duke who had once believed he could simply purchase her father's debt and control her entire future, had been fundamentally transformed by her quiet strength and unwavering determination to seek genuine truth and accountability, rather than allowing either convenient revenge or comfortable denial to define the conclusion of their complicated story. Months passed following the gala confession, and Elena found herself reflecting on how dramatically her life had transformed since that first terrifying meeting with Damien Ashcroft in his cold, imposing study. The empire he had built through fear and calculated manipulation now operated under entirely different principles, with genuine restitution programs helping rebuild the businesses and reputations of families he had once deliberately destroyed. Grace Bennett's family business had been fully restored, with additional investment helping it grow beyond its original success before Damien's interference years earlier. Edward Whitmore had finally received public acknowledgement, clearing his grandfather's name. The truth about the original scandal between the Ashcroft and Whitmore families finally revealed after Damien commissioned an independent investigation into his own father's historical deception. Her own father, Vincent Marchetti, had rebuilt his business with newfound purpose, no longer burdened by debt or the shame of failure that had once nearly destroyed him entirely. Elena visited him regularly, watching with quiet pride as he slowly reclaimed his confidence and sense of identity beyond the financial ruin that had once defined his existence. Yet despite these positive developments, Elena understood that her own personal journey remained far from finished. She had spent months carefully rebuilding her sense of self within this complicated marriage, refusing to simply return to being a passive, compliant wife, despite the genuine transformation she had witnessed within Damien's character and actions. She had established her own design studio finally, the dream she once believed impossible given her circumstances, using resources and connections gained through her position as Duchess to build something entirely her own, separate from Damien's business empire or his family legacy. The studio quickly gained recognition for its innovative designs, Elena's natural talent and determination finally given room to flourish after years of feeling trapped within circumstances beyond her control. One evening, Damien found her working late in her private studio, sketches and fabric samples scattered across her workspace as she prepared for an upcoming exhibition showcasing her latest collection. "Your work continues to impress me," Damien said, studying the elegant designs spread across her table. "You have built something truly remarkable here." "Thank you," Elena said, allowing herself a genuine smile at his sincere compliment. "It feels good to create something entirely my own, separate from everything else happening in our lives." "I have been thinking," Damien said carefully, "about everything that has happened between us since that first day in my study. I understand I have no right to expect forgiveness or genuine affection, given how our marriage began." Elena set down her sketching pencil, studying him thoughtfully. "You are right that trust cannot simply be restored because circumstances have improved. But I have also witnessed genuine change within you, Damien. Actions that speak louder than the calculated cruelty that once defined your character." "Does that mean there is hope for us?" Damien asked, vulnerability evident in his voice in a way she had rarely witnessed since their very first tentative moment of honesty in the garden months earlier. Elena considered her answer carefully, understanding the weight this moment carried for both their futures. "I believe genuine partnership is possible between us now, built on honesty rather than manipulation. But I need you to understand something important, Damien. I will never again be simply a pawn within someone else's carefully calculated plans, not even yours. I would not want that," Damien said sincerely. "I have learned, through everything that has happened, that true partnership requires equality, not control. You have taught me that lesson more powerfully than anything else in my life." Elena felt something warm settle within her chest at his words, recognizing genuine sincerity rather than calculated manipulation. Their relationship had transformed dramatically from its cold, transactional beginning into something far more complex and genuine, built now upon mutual respect and shared understanding rather than fear and manipulation. As the exhibition for her design studio finally arrived, Elena stood proudly among her creations, watching guests admire her work with genuine appreciation rather than simple curiosity about her position as Duchess. Damien attended by her side, though this time his presence felt supportive rather than merely performative. genuinely proud of her accomplishments rather than simply maintaining appearances for society's benefit. Reporters and photographers documented the successful exhibition, though the story they told now centered on Elena's genuine talent and hard-won independence, rather than simply her marriage to the powerful Duke Ashcroft. She had successfully built an identity entirely her own, separate from the circumstances that had once defined her existence, as merely a solution to her father's financial troubles. Standing in her studio that evening, surrounded by evidence of everything she had built through her own determination and resilience, Elena reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. She had entered this marriage as a frightened, desperate girl, forced into circumstances entirely beyond her control, believing herself powerless against the calculated cruelty of a cold, ruthless Duke. Yet through patience, careful strategy, and unwavering determination, she had transformed that powerless beginning into genuine strength and independence. She had uncovered devastating truths, built powerful alliances, and ultimately forced genuine accountability and transformation, not through simple destruction or revenge, but through courage and unwavering commitment to justice and truth. The cold Duke, who had once believed he could simply purchase her future, had been fundamentally changed by her quiet strength, while Elena herself had discovered depths of resilience and capability she never knew she possessed. Whatever challenges remained ahead for their complicated, evolving relationship, Elena understood that she now faced her future from a position of genuine power and self-determination, rather than helplessness and fear. She was no longer merely her father's daughter, sacrificed to save the family fortune, nor simply Damien Ashcroft's Duchess, playing a role designed for someone else's benefit. She had become entirely her own person, capable of building genuine success and happiness on her own carefully earned terms, regardless of whatever circumstances had once threatened to define her entire existence. As she looked around her thriving studio, surrounded by her own creative accomplishments and the genuine respect of a husband, finally transformed through honest accountability, Elena felt a profound sense of peace settle over her heart. She had faced impossible circumstances with courage and determination, ultimately emerging not as a victim of someone else's cruel manipulation, but as the true architect of her own remarkable and hard-won victory.